When Emma and Daniel Kearns bought the small, wood-framed house in the Hollywood Hills, it wasn't the star history that attracted them. They weren't celebrity chasers, nor were they the kind of people who believed a home's past could cling to it. For them, it was about the location, a winding road that opened into quiet vistas of the city lights, a sloped yard shaded by eucalyptus and jacaranda trees, and the kind of privacy you rarely find in Los Angeles. Still, when their real estate agent hesitated before mentioning the former owner, it caught them off guard. "River Phoenix lived here," she said carefully, as if testing their reaction. "In the late 80s and early 90s. It's been vacant for a while after he passed." Daniel, a photographer who'd grown up in Oregon, knew the name. River's films were part of his teenage years, the quiet charisma, the intensity. Emma didn't know much beyond the fact that he had died young, tragically. They exchanged glances, shrugged, and signed the papers. From the beginning, the house felt too still. It wasn't empty in the way vacant properties usually are. It had a faint scent of aged wood and something else they couldn't place, like old cigarette smoke that had seeped into the walls decades ago. The rooms were oddly cold, even when the sun poured through the windows in the morning. Their first night was unremarkable, save for a soft creaking above the bedroom that they dismissed as the settling of old beams. But by the second week, they began noticing changes. Daniel would find the living room curtains drawn in the morning, though he was certain he'd left them open. Emma swore she'd left her coffee mug on the kitchen counter, only to find it on the back porch railing. At night, while she was reading in bed, faint acoustic guitar would drift from somewhere in the house, stopping the instant she called out to Daniel. One afternoon, while unpacking boxes in the den, Daniel discovered a small door at the back of a built-in bookshelf. Behind it was a narrow crawlspace lined with dusty boards. Inside, there was only one thing: a warped cassette tape in a cracked plastic case, the label nearly rubbed away. The next evening, curiosity got the better of him. He dug out an old tape deck from a storage bin and played it. The audio was rough, filled with static, but beneath it was the sound of someone softly strumming a guitar, murmuring fragments of lyrics that never formed a complete song. There was no applause, no studio polish. It sounded like a private moment, never meant for anyone else to hear. That night, Daniel woke to find the bedroom door wide open and the faint scent of sweat and patchouli oil in the air. Emma was sitting upright, staring at the foot of the bed, pale and trembling. "There was someone in here," she whispered. "I saw him, just standing there, watching." Daniel didn't believe her, not fully, not yet. But over the next few weeks, the house seemed to close in on them. Footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. A shadow that would dart past the edge of their vision. Cold drafts that brushed the back of their necks even when the windows were shut tight. The breaking point came late one night when Daniel was editing photos in the den. The old cassette was still in the deck, and without touching it, it began to play. The music was slower now, the strumming uneven, as though the player's hands were shaking. And over it, faint but unmistakable, was a man's voice, not singing, but whispering. Daniel leaned closer to the speaker. "I can't leave," the voice said. The tape stopped abruptly, the air in the room colder than he'd ever felt. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He stayed in the den, slouched forward in his chair, staring at the silent cassette deck as if it might come to life again. The room felt heavier now, as though the air itself had thickened. Outside, the wind pushed gently through the eucalyptus trees, making their thin, scythe-like leaves scrape softly against the window. Every sound seemed amplified in that stillness: the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall, the shifting of the wood frame as the house cooled in the night, his own heartbeat drumming in his ears. When morning came, Emma found him exactly where she'd left him, his eyes bloodshot and his coffee cold. He told her about the voice. She listened, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she only said, "I believe you," and went to make breakfast. But in the days that followed, her behavior began to change. Emma, who was normally easygoing and practical, became quiet, distracted. She'd stop mid-sentence as if she'd lost her train of thought, her eyes fixed on something over Daniel's shoulder. At night, she began sleeping in fits, waking with the sheets tangled around her legs, her hair damp as though she'd been running. Once, Daniel caught her standing barefoot in the hallway at 3 a.m., staring at the closed front door. When he touched her shoulder, she turned slowly toward him, her face pale and her eyes unfocused, like someone still half dreaming. She didn't remember it in the morning. The small, unexplainable events multiplied. The old brass doorknob on the den door would be ice cold to the touch, even in the middle of the day. The faint scent of smoke, not cigarettes, but something deeper, almost like burned sage or campfire embers, would drift through the living room, curling into the corners before vanishing again. The house's original hardwood floors, sanded smooth long before they moved in, would creak under the weight of invisible steps. It was Emma who finally suggested they learn more about the property. "If this place has been sitting here for years," she said one afternoon as they sat in the kitchen, "there has to be a reason. I mean, people knew whose house this was. They must have wanted it. But nobody took it. They started with public records, then moved on to quiet conversations with neighbors. Most people were polite but evasive, their words trailing off or changing subject when River's name came up. An older man who lived 2 houses down, a retired sound engineer named Walter, was the first to give them more than vague replies. "I remember when he lived here," Walter said, leaning against his fence, his eyes shaded by the brim of an old baseball cap. "Kid was different, quiet but intense. Always had people coming and going, musicians mostly. I'd see him sitting out on the back steps at night, playing guitar by himself. Never bothered anybody." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "But after, people said they still heard it. Music. From in there." Years later, Daniel asked if Walter had ever been inside since River's death. The old man shook his head quickly. "No, I don't step foot in there. Too many people went in curious, came out pale and looking like they'd been sick for days. Place doesn't want company." That night, they didn't talk much over dinner. The house seemed to press in around them, every creak and sigh of the old structure reminding them of Walter's words. As they cleared the table, Daniel noticed the cassette player in the den again. He hadn't touched it since that night. The warp tape was still inside. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, he returned to the den. The room was lit only by the dim yellow glow from the hall. He sat down in front of the player, staring at it for what felt like a long time. Finally, he pressed play. For a few seconds, there was nothing but static and the faint hum of background noise. Then came the guitar, slow, hesitant, each note hanging in the air a moment longer than it should. Somewhere in the recording, barely audible, was the sound of breathing. Not the kind you hear in music, not a singer keeping time. This was ragged, uneven, almost like someone who'd just run up a flight of stairs. And then the voice again. "I can't leave," it whispered. This time, Daniel didn't stop the tape. The voice continued, low and strained, like someone speaking from far away. "You hear me? Don't stay." The tape clicked and went silent. From the hallway behind him, Daniel heard the faint sound of bare feet moving across the wood floor, slow, deliberate, coming closer. He turned. The hallway was empty. "Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story." Daniel didn't move at first. The sound of those footsteps still echoed in his mind, each one measured, almost hesitant, like someone walking in a room where they weren't sure they belonged. He sat perfectly still in the creaking desk chair, listening for any other signs of movement. The house, however, had returned to its heavy silence, the kind that doesn't feel like peace, but like the air is holding its breath. He stood and stepped into the hallway. The soft glow from the bedroom lamp at the far end barely reached him, leaving most of the corridor in shadow. The hardwood floor beneath his bare feet was cold, colder than it had been just moments earlier. He glanced toward the kitchen, then the front door, both exactly as they should be. But something was off. It took him a moment to realize what it was. The faint smell of patchouli oil again, that same earthy sweet scent he'd noticed before. It lingered in the hallway, stronger now, as if someone had just walked past him. When he finally returned to bed, Emma was awake. She lay on her side, staring at the opposite wall, her expression blank. "You heard it too," she said softly, without looking at him. Daniel hesitated. What do you mean? The walking. Her voice was flat, tired. I thought it was you. But it wasn't, was it? He didn't answer. They both knew the truth. The following week blurred into a sequence of small, unsettling incidents. Objects moved in ways they couldn't explain. Emma's scarf, which she'd left draped over a chair, appeared folded neatly on their bed. A single glass of water left on the kitchen counter was found on the back porch, the surface trembling slightly as if it had just been set down. More than once, Daniel caught himself stopping mid-step, convinced he'd heard someone strumming a guitar from the den or the back porch. It was never loud, never a full song, just fragments, as though someone were tuning up or experimenting with a few chords. One afternoon, Emma decided to work from home. She set up her laptop at the dining table, her coffee beside her, the big sliding glass door to the backyard letting in the pale winter light. Around 2 o'clock, she heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping from the far end of the yard, near the eucalyptus trees. She stepped outside, the cool air tightening the skin on her arms. The sound continued: tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. She followed it around the side of the house and froze. The old wooden steps at the back porch, the ones Walter had mentioned River used to sit on, were wet, as though someone had been sitting there for a long time, the condensation forming around them. But it hadn't rained in days. On the top step lay a cigarette butt, still faintly smoldering. Emma backed slowly toward the sliding door, her gaze fixed on that single curl of smoke. By the time she reached the kitchen, the smell had followed her inside. That night, Daniel found her sitting at the dining table with a stack of old newspapers spread out in front of her. She'd gone to the library earlier, she explained, digging through archives about the house and River's years living there. There's not much, she admitted, pushing one of the papers toward him. The headline was small, buried in the entertainment section: actor retreats to hillside home between projects. The accompanying photo was grainy, but unmistakable: River on the back steps, a guitar in his lap, looking off into the distance. Emma tapped her finger against the photo. Look at the trees behind him. Same ones. Same steps. She swallowed hard. It's like he's still there, still doing the same things. Daniel didn't respond, but his eyes lingered on the photo. The more he looked, the more it felt less like a portrait and more like something caught by accident, like River had been deep in thought, unaware of the camera, his expression almost heavy. 2 nights later, Daniel was woken by a sound so close and clear it jolted him upright. The low, steady strumming of an acoustic guitar coming from the den. It wasn't the faint, faraway sound they'd heard before. This was in the house. He stood, his bare feet making no sound on the floor, and moved toward the source. The closer he got, the more defined the melody became. It was slow, deliberate, and strangely melancholic, as if each note carried more weight than it could hold. The den door was half open. Daniel reached out and pushed it fully open, the old hinges groaning softly. The room was empty. The guitar stopped, but the smell: sweat, faint smoke, and that sweet patchouli was overwhelming now, filling the small space until Daniel felt lightheaded. Behind him, in the hallway, a voice spoke. Low, calm. You're not going anywhere. Daniel froze in the doorway of the den. The voice was so close it could have been whispered directly into his ear, but when he turned, the hallway was empty. His breath came slow, heavy, and he realized his hands were trembling. The smell clung to him now, that mingling of sweat, patchouli, and faint smoke, as though it had seeped into his skin. He stepped back into the hall, eyes darting toward the bedroom where Emma still slept. The thought hit him suddenly, like ice down his spine. What if she isn't alone in there? He pushed open the bedroom door. Emma was in bed, but not sleeping. She sat upright, her eyes open wide, staring toward the far corner of the room. Daniel, her voice cracked. He's here. Daniel followed her gaze. The corner was in shadow, but something about it felt wrong, a heaviness, a presence that couldn't be explained by darkness alone. He didn't see a figure, not fully, but there was a shape there, the faintest outline of a man's shoulders, his head tilted slightly as if listening. The air in the room was so cold now that their breath was visible. Emma's hand found Daniel's, gripping it tightly. "Why won't you leave us alone?" Daniel demanded, his voice louder than he intended. The outline didn't move, but a voice soft, low, almost mournful filled the room. "This is still mine." The bedroom lamp flickered once, twice, then went out. The only light came from the pale spill of the moon through the curtains, illuminating Emma's face, pale and rigid with fear. Daniel could feel something shifting in the air, not wind, but movement, like someone brushing past him. And then the guitar began to play. It wasn't coming from the den this time. The sound was in the room with them. Each note was slow, aching, the kind of melody that makes you feel the weight of it in your chest. Emma clutched his arm so hard her nails dug into his skin, but neither of them moved. The playing went on for what felt like minutes, maybe longer. Then, without warning, the strings snapped mid-chord, the sharp twang cutting through the silence. The shadow in the corner was gone. They didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sun came up, Daniel began stuffing clothes into a suitcase. Emma didn't argue, she was already packing her own. They left without breakfast, without looking back, driving down the winding road until the house disappeared from view. But the strange thing was, even miles away, the smell was still there. Faint at first, then stronger, as though it had followed them into the car. When they finally stopped at a motel outside the city, Emma went into the bathroom to wash her face. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, trying to breathe. From the corner of the motel room came the sound of a guitar. Just a few soft, careful chords. And then, quietly, a voice. "You can't leave." Daniel's head snapped up at the sound. The motel room was dim, the cheap curtains drawn tight, the air conditioner rattling in the wall, but the sound of those chords was unmistakable. They weren't tinny, like they'd come from a neighbor's television, and they weren't muffled, as if bleeding in from another room. They were here, filling the small space as if the musician sat just out of sight, in the shadowed corner by the dresser. Emma stepped out of the bathroom, her face damp, a towel in her hand. She froze mid-step, her eyes locking with Daniel's. "You hear it too," she whispered. He didn't answer, didn't have to. The melody slowed, each note dragging like a weight being pulled through water. Daniel could feel it in his chest, in his ribs, almost as though the sound was vibrating through his bones. Then came the smell, faint at first, curling into the edges of the room before thickening in the air. Smoke, sweat, that same sweet, earthy patchouli that had clung to the hallway at the house. Emma's eyes began to water, though whether from the scent or from something else entirely, Daniel couldn't tell. The music stopped. In the silence, there was only the hum of the air conditioner and the faint hiss of traffic from the highway beyond the walls. Daniel swallowed hard, his pulse hammering in his ears. He took a step toward the corner, slow, deliberate, but as he did, the overhead light flickered once, then went out completely. The room was plunged into shadow. Emma's breath quickened. "Daniel!" From the darkness, the voice came again, low and calm but with a gravity that made every muscle in Daniel's body tighten. "You don't leave." The bed dipped suddenly, as if someone had sat down at its edge. Emma let out a sharp gasp and stumbled backward until her shoulders hit the wall. Daniel's hand shot out toward the space beside him, but it met only cold, empty air, cold so sharp it made his fingertips ache. And then, almost tenderly, as if to prove that they weren't alone, a single chord rang out from the guitar. The sound hung in the air far longer than it should have, vibrating through the walls, through their chests, until Daniel felt his vision blur. The light blinked back on. The bed was untouched. The corner was empty. But the smell was stronger than ever. Emma pressed her hand over her mouth, her voice shaking. "Daniel, we left the house." He looked at her, his own breath uneven. "No," he said quietly. "It left with us." Outside the motel window, a eucalyptus branch scraped softly against the glass, a sound that shouldn't have been there in the middle of a desert town. And somewhere, impossibly close, the guitar began again. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.